Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. And before this video starts, I know my LED lights are not working. Is here. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the problem is. It's almost Christmas week and I do not have the lights on. It really bugs me, but the lights are not working. I don't know. I mean, these lights are working. I got some light. What's up, guys? And in case if you have been living under a rock, Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley #2 is on December 18th, this Saturday. It is finally here. The talk, everything is being put to the test on December the 18th. Jake Paul was supposed to fight Tommy Fury, but Tommy Fury backed out of that fight because of a rib injury that he had during training camp. And none other than the chosen one himself, Tyron Woodley, ended up stepping up to the plate to face Jake Paul for a second time. When Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley fought the first time, it was a massive fight. Both fighters, Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley, both showed some great boxing skills, but there is a few cons in their boxing abilities. Personally, when I watched the fight, I had Jake Paul winning every single round except for round 4, which would make the fight 6 out of 2 Jake Paul. Tyron Woodley round number 4 when he landed that big time shot that ended up hurting Jake, and I forget what other round I gave him. I think it was the round after that or the round after that one. Both fighters landed some huge power shots on each other and it made it a dog fight, but in the end Jake Paul ended up winning the fight over a split decision victory from the judges. Charlie, my dog, just came in my room. Alright, what was I talking about? That's right, Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley. Jake Paul, at the end of that fight, ended up winning the fight with a split decision victory that the judges decided. There was only one judge that gave the entire fight to Tyron Woodley, but the problem child still ceased to exist. And again, for those who have been living under a rock, Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley #2 is this Saturday on December 18th. This is a massive fight card because these two fighters have fought before. Now, obviously, from the last encounter they had with each other in their last fight, we can take pros and cons from both fighters and put them into this fight and to see how well they have improved. Now, before I get any further with this content, I do want to apologize for the lack of content that I have been putting out for you guys. These past 2 weeks have been extremely busy for me. I've had meetings, appointments, and I'm also am in school, so I've had these exams I've had to study for, plus the things I do at home and other businesses that I've been accomplishing and trying to grow as well. Literally around Christmas is my busiest time of year. I'm always working on these days around these few months. I'm always trying to make something or end up trying to fit stuff in at the latest time, so then I can start the next year off strong. So again, this is just my busiest time of year, so I apologize for that. But moving forward with this video, Jake Paul versus versus Tyron Woodley #2 breakdown. Let's go. Now, I ended up pulling a video of their last fight, Jake versus Tyron, on YouTube, but this video looks like something that you would see at your great-grandma's house when she first buys her TV. So the quality might be a little bit crappy, but I'm going to do my best to iterate my thoughts and break down as much as I can leading into this next fight, or what you would call the rematch. Okay, so one thing I ended up noticing here was Jake Paul immediately when he came out was his jab. Which, by the way, I ended up predicting myself that Jake Paul was going to use his jab early on before this fight even began. You see Tyron Woodley here, another jab from Jake Paul. Tyron Woodley is just walking down Jake Paul, but he's not activating on anything here. He's just stalking him. Jake Paul with the feints. Again, the jabs are landing for Jake Paul, and that's what I feel like he's going to end up using in this fight as well. When Jake Paul put his jab out there, he ended up using it to keep Tyron Woodley away from him because Tyron was literally stalking Jake Paul the entire fight. That's what literally won Jake Paul rounds. His jab was literally flush and he ended up backing Tyron Woodley up while keeping the distance and not letting Tyron Woodley get in. And we all thought as long as this fight goes, it would favor Woodley because we never seen Jake Paul except for his amateur fight, which Jake Paul was a completely different fighter than, that Tyron Woodley would end up winning the fight as long as this fight would continue. But Jake Paul ended up proving a lot of people wrong that night and ended up winning the fight. And Tyron Woodley is being very specific with his shots. He wants to be perfectly accurate. But we also seen this from Woodley. Woodley never, like in his last few fights in the UFC, had never like activated on any of his shots or activated on anything that, you know, he came close to. I think if I'm correctly, he ended up hurting Kamaru Usman, but not being able to finish him or activate on the opportunity that he was given. And with this fight against Jake Paul here, he ended up hurting Jake and putting him against the ropes, but not taking advantage of that as well. However, as much as Jake is landing right now with the jab, he needs to be more active here. Still, like both of these fighters need to come out swinging with each other, and both need to bring the fight to each other and not let the other one run around the cage, or sorry, not the cage. I feel like we're talking about UFC because Tyron Woodley is a UFC fighter, around the boxing ring. Now, round 4, I believe, and this is also something that Jake really had right there. That left hook, you can see that hurt Woodley. I'm gonna play it a little slower so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Body shot, hook. That's on Woodley right here, and he ends up kind of falling. Look at that. He ends up catching himself off balance over that check hook, which is also something that I did see as well from Jake Paul's camp, that Jake Paul was working on his check hooks and uppercuts. Clearly tell that Jake was working on his hooks and uppercuts. Hook, 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 uppercut, hook, yeah. I felt like Jake ended up getting cocky in the 4th round and landing too many hooks that Tyron Woodley was able to capitalize. I can't talk today, guys. I don't know what my issue is. As you see, Jake Paul ends up getting a little too predictable, and Tyron Woodley ended up actually doing a great job with this feint that he does here. He ends up feinting a 1-2 and ends up landing a right hand. If we want to look back just a little bit before, we can. Here, Tyron Woodley doesn't show it great in this video, but Tyron Woodley ends up faking a right hand, fakes a jab, then comes in, extends his left hand to see where he can land that right hand at, and then moves his head, avoids the hook, and bangs him over the top and sends Jake Paul flying back onto the ropes. So if Tyron Woodley can end up getting Jake Paul back onto the ropes again and land a shot like that again, it could be another possibility that we could see the end of the problem child. And Jake here does a great job actually circling around the ring and resetting his game plan here. And then a left hook, I think he lands on Jake here. There's another, there it is, there's a left hook. Jake ends up landing a jab after that hook. But then Jake plants himself right here, is lining up for a shot, jab to the body he lands, and then a right hand over the top that ends up hurting Woodley. You see Woodley is leaning on Jake here. So Jake, you can't say anything bad about him on if he's a fighter or not, because he is a fighter. We've seen him go 8 rounds against a 5-time UFC fighter, a 5-time UFC champion. If we can look at it, Jake Paul is used to this type of fights that he's in. His first pro fight, he fought on Nissan Gibbon, ended up literally circling around the ring and just popping his jab, and ended up landing the right hand that ended up TKOing Gibb. This fight was a very similar experience for Jake, except it was against a high-level fighter. Now, I'm not going to say Jake Paul was extremely talented in this fight. He was extremely, defeating Tyron Woodley here. Jake Paul was not extremely impressive here. He only showed a little bit in this fight, but at the same time, he was on his back foot the entire time, which, again, the last time he ended up really fighting a fight for like this was against Nissan Gibb in his first professional fight. And Jake Paul's coach, BJ Flores, was also on a video and actually an interview with the Wade Concept. Yes, the man himself. BJ is actually pretty confident with Jake Paul's ability to end Tyron Woodley's career. I mean, usually when you hear Jake, he's hyping himself up more than he should. BJ Flores is the guy who's more realistic with Jake Paul's ability and can tell you more naturally from a realistic standpoint. But when you hear BJ, the one who's realistic about Jake Paul's boxing ability, say that Jake Paul's on a completely different level, it gets your confidence rising for Jake Paul, and to see how much Jake Paul has improved from his last fight to the rematch that we're about to see on December the 18th.
We talked about it before, like our motto in camp is we won't be outworked. A good word to describe Jake would be relentless. He really is. He doesn't stop. He's like a shark. He's always going. He's always trying to, get better, improve. And I mean, you just got to wake up every day and be grateful. You gotta. I would hope, honestly, I hope when I have kids one day that my son has the same type of work ethic that Jake Paul has.
Jake Paul works extremely hard for everyone to doubt him, and he's only been up against, I wouldn't say not great fighters, but Tyron Woodley was his hardest opponent, and Jake Paul ended up outboxing Tyron Woodley here. And Tyron Woodley needs to just be more active.
Something that I did also see from Jake Paul is his patience with this fight. Jake Paul has never gone 8 rounds before, ever in his boxing career. And especially against someone who is a 5-time UFC champion. And Tyron Woodley was extremely patient, and honestly, like I said earlier, I felt like he did not want to get hit in this fight. But I think he realizes not being active enough was the mistake in this fight. Jake Paul, after the first 2 rounds, I was getting a little nervous on how Jake was going to handle the rest of the rounds, because he never has had a fight gone past 2 rounds, especially after round 3. Leading into round 4, he ended up getting that big time right hand shot. Ended up sending Jake Paul back to middle school, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so looking at this and breaking down what we have just watched, Jake Paul obviously with the jab, he ends up landing that early in the first round, and he ends up continuously landing it throughout the entire fight and ends up keeping his distance away from Tyron Woodley, so Tyron Woodley is not able to land any big time shots on Jake. I honestly can say I do see that happening again. I think Jake Paul is going to end up landing a bunch of jabs early and then setting up his right hand a lot more than he did in his first fight when they first fought. Jake Paul knows that if he doesn't knock out Tyron Woodley early, he's not going to knock him out at all. So those body shots from Jake is like a setup for the later rounds. As you know, those body shots come in with that big overhand right. As we know, Jake Paul's specialty is the jab to the body and big right hand over the top, and that big hammer of a right hand over the top. Something that I actually didn't talk about while we're breaking down is Jake Paul's movement around the ring. When Tyron Woodley landed that big right hand, Jake Paul ended up recovering between the end of round 4 and the beginning of round 5. Jake Paul's movement, he was circling around the ring, just again running, as Tyron Woodley would say, running away from Tyron Woodley, not going into the action, but circling around the ring, conceiving his energy, popping that jab out, and just conceiving his energy. Tyron Woodley needs to take advantage of Jake's movement. He cannot move like that as much as he can in this rematch. Jake Paul is gonna easily recover and end up landing a big time shot like he did moments after he ended up landing a shot to the face, or taking a shot to the face, I should say. Tyron Woodley cannot be scared to go into this fight against Jake Paul. He needs to bring the action to him like he did in the last fight, but land punches. Like I said before in this fight, that Jake Paul is going to look in the earlier rounds to end up looking for the KO, land tons of body shots, and end up trying to take rounds early so that he's not on the back end of the card. I think Tyron Woodley needs to start off strong in the earlier rounds, take round 1 and 2 and possibly 3, and end up conceiving his energy in round 4 and maybe possibly 5, but he needs to do that to scare Jake, to know that he's a completely different fighter, that he is a child and he's facing an actual fighter this time. Not only will he scare Jake, but he will be up on the rounds, and at that moment Jake Paul is going to have a huge fight. But guys, that is my Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley breakdown. Hopefully I did not miss anything. This was a kind of a weird video to film. I've been, again, very busy. I haven't had much time to plan for this video. I've been extremely busy. But I am so excited to see Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley number 2. This is a massive fight, and I can't stress enough to say how excited I am for this fight and to see who wins. Who is the better boxer? Who is the better fighter? Will Jake Paul beat Tyron Woodley again and end up possibly knocking him out, leaving off that chip on his shoulder and proving once again why he is a person to be taken seriously? Or will Tyron Woodley pick up the pace and end Jake Paul's career and get revenge from his last fight and end up finishing Jake Paul? I don't have the answers for that right now, but I guess we'll find out on December 18th. Because until then, this fight and this rivalry is not over.